Let me ask you a question. Do you like your name? It sounds ridiculously simple, doesn't it? But I've got to say that it's one of the reasons why I've chosen to keep my last name, even though I'm married. And even though our daughter has my husband's last name, even though I use his name socially, I just really like my names. The tradition of a bride taking her husband's surname is deeply rooted in historical, legal, and cultural contexts, and it reflects a broad theme of patriarchy, inheritance, and social cohesion. So, for a progressive couple who are getting married, what are the pros and cons of changing your last name? What will it mean for your families and in your social circle, and even for your children if you choose to have any or adopt? In today's episode, I'm going to share with you a bit about the past and why, generally and definitely depending on the era, culture, and religion that you're in, you find yourself in, the place in the world you're at. But generally, brides have taken on their husband's last names after marriage, the pros of both of you having the same last name, what happens in a mixed orientation marriage, the downsides, plus the questions you need to ask yourself and your future husband, wife, or spouse to work out what the best path is for you to take. Let's get stuck into it. Unbridely is a community of pro-wedding vendors who believe in freedom and integrity in weddings, giving you options, solutions, tips and tricks to create the experience and memories that you and your fiancé really want and deserve. Because we believe that weddings are a team sport. With how-tos, stories and interviews with recently married couples, we find out what went right and what they'd change if they could go back and do it all over again. I'm Camille and welcome to the Unbridely podcast. For modern engaged couples, the decision for one or both of them to change their last names after marriage can be multifaceted, involving personal, professional and cultural considerations. But in the past, often there wasn't a choice to be made because of legal, cultural and social pressures that meant that to be accepted as a married person, you simply had to follow the rules. Women in ancient Roman times until 476 AD actually retained their family name after marriage, but added their husband's name in genitive form to the end of their surname. And then in medieval Europe until the 1400s, the practice of taking the husband's surname began to take hold, influenced by the norms of patrilineal inheritance and the subjugation of women's legal identities to their husbands. Wasn't great. Within the feudal system in Europe between the 9th and 15th centuries, the land ownership and family lineage were strictly patriarchal, reinforcing the custom of women adopting their husband's name to signify a transfer of guardianship and property rights. And in English common law, married couples were viewed as a single legal entity where the husband's identity and legal standing subsumed the wife's, leading to the widespread adoption of his surname. In addition, there were cultural and religious influences. So in Christianity, particularly through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, it emphasised the unity of marriage, and it was often interpreted as a woman joining her husband's household and identity. There are social status and norms, so having your husband's surname became a symbol of unity, of social order, of being respectable. And this became deeply ingrained in social customs and expectations. But then as times began to change with modern evolution in the 19th and 20th centuries, so women's suffrage and movements for gender equality, the practice began to be questioned and alternative options emerged like the hyphenation of both names together, or the woman or one of the partners retaining their birth name. And today, practices vary widely across cultures and individuals, and it reflects personal, cultural, and sometimes feminist considerations as well. Changing your name after you get married is different all over the world, and these practices reflect general trends and traditional expectations, But it's fair to say that attitudes towards name changing after marriage are evolving globally. More and more couples are adopting flexible approaches that best suit their personal needs and cultural identities. I'd love to share with you a bit of a look around the globe at different countries and cultures and what they expect as being the norm. So, in Western cultures, so think United States and Canada, in many parts of North America, it's common and often expected for a woman to take her husband's last name after marriage. But more women are choosing to keep their maiden names or hyphenate their last names with their husband. In mixed orientation marriages, which basically means a marriage of two people with differing sexual orientations, the decision to change last names to adopt one or the other's surname becomes a lot more open-ended because there isn't the history and the culture, the expectations there to dictate what the norm is, because there isn't a norm. And so the idea of one or both choosing to keep their names, to hyphenate, to develop a new last name, it really opens up the options. In the United Kingdom, very similar to the US, it's traditional for a woman to take her husband's surname. And again, many modern couples are looking at other options. Here in Australia and over the ditch in New Zealand, these countries share similar customs with the UK and North America, with many women traditionally, and in the past, taking their husband's name after marriage. But again, there is an increased number of couples who are looking to identify themselves in a family that is more a combination of both families coming together. In European cultures, so for example, Germany, it's common for a woman to take her husband's last name, although it's becoming more accepted for women to keep their maiden names, or again, the hyphenation. Traditionally, women in Spain don't change their last names after marriage, and instead their children receive both parents' surnames, typically the father's first and the mother's second. In France, while it's common for a woman to take her husband's last name socially, legally she retains her maiden name and can use either surname. And in Italy, it's not customary for women to change their last names after marriage, and they keep their maiden names for legal and professional purposes, which sounds like another evolution again. In Japan, it's legally required for married couples to have the same surname, and traditionally the wife takes the husband's surname. However, there is growing support for allowing couples to retain separate surnames. In China, women traditionally keep their maiden names after marriage, but in some cases women might informally adopt their husband's surname. Practices in India vary very widely across different regions and different communities. In many Hindu traditions, women take their husband's last name, but this is not universal. And in other communities, and especially among more modern or urban populations, women might retain their maiden names or birth surnames. In Mexico and other Spanish-speaking countries similar to Spain, women typically don't change their last names after they get married, and children inherit both parents' surnames. In many Arab countries, women don't change their last names after marriage, and they retain their father's surname throughout their life. In Africa, so South Africa, women traditionally take their husband's last name, their surname, although keeping the maiden name or using both is starting to become more common as well. And in Nigeria, it's the norm for women to adopt their husband's surname. But again, things are changing and have changed. But again, these practices can vary widely depending on the ethnic group and personal preference. So as you can tell, just by having a quick whip around the planet there, the expectations are wildly different all over the place, and the way people have done things in the past and currently do them is constantly evolving. This opens the door for you, my friend, to really have a think about what it means for you to change your last name, to adopt a new last name, to hyphenate your names together, or to choose something brand new, something that signifies the start of your new family together. And what I'd love to do is really have a think through, what are the pros and cons? If we're sitting across from each other today, I would get you to go, okay, what do I like about changing my last name after I get married? What do I hate? What am I trying to avoid? And so thinking about the option of changing your last name, let's look at the pros here. There is the unity side and the tradition, because changing your last name can symbolize unity with your new husband, wife, spouse, and create a sense of familial cohesion, especially if you plan to have children and you want everyone to share the same surname. There's the simplicity and the recognition. So when you have the same last name as your spouse, it can be easier legally and with bureaucratic processes, thinking about buying your home, opening that joint bank account, all those sorts of things, as well as socially. So it can reduce confusion in social and professional settings. It can also mean a fresh start. Adopting your spouse's last name can also symbolize that new chapter in your life, offering a sense of beginnings, renewal, a fresh start in your marital journey, if you like. There are the cultural expectations. So in some cultures and communities, changing your last name might be expected, and it can help you fit in better with societal norms. If you don't want to ruffle feathers, if you don't want to upset your mother-in-law, sometimes it's the easiest way. And some would argue that changing your last name to your spouse's last name, adopting theirs, can also help with your sense of identity and belonging, because some people who get married, they feel a stronger sense of identity as a couple when they share the same last name. But of course, taking on your spouse's last name is not the only way to do that. So let's have a look at the downsides, because I think you might relate to some of these things. This might be why you haven't quite decided on whether or not you want to change your last name just yet. One of the cons is a loss of personal identity. Changing your last name can feel like losing a part of who you are, a part of who you've always been, and especially if you've established a personal and/or professional reputation with your birth surname. Adopting your spouse's last name could also have an impact on your professional identity. If you've built a career under your birth surname, changing your name might cause confusion. It might disrupt professional recognition and continuity. If you've had anything published, I've had a lot of published scientists who have papers that are published under their birth surname, and to change their last name to their spouse's last name means that they don't lose it, of course. It doesn't disappear into the ether, but it means anyone looking it up can't see that. They can't see that continuity of their professional life. There's also an administrative hassle. The process of changing your name involves updating lots of legal documents and records, so your driver's license, passport, bank accounts, which can be time-consuming, can be cumbersome, can be a pain in the ass. Totally get it. But that's also why I love Easy Name Change. I'm going to put the link in the show notes of Easy Name Change, because if you are going to change your last name after getting married, then do it the easy way. Save yourself the time, save yourself the hassle. And to get $5 off your name change pack from Easy Name Change, you can just use the code Unbridely5. So that's UNBRIDELY, the number 5. And until the end of 2024, you get $5 off your name change pack from Easy Name Change. There's also the feminist perspective. So some people view the tradition of changing your last name as a patriarchal practice. If you identify as a female and your future spouse identifies as male, then choosing to keep your maiden name can sometimes be seen as a feminist statement of independence and of equality. And there's the cultural and historical significance. So your birth last name may have history, may have significance to you that you want to preserve and pass on to future generations. If you had a sweary, chocolate-addicted, wine-sipping fairy godmother who could help you with your wedding planning, what would you wish for? Perhaps no more waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, wondering what you've forgotten, or fretting about your RSVPs. Maybe no more spreadsheets or post-it notes or endless to-do lists. Well, I can help you with all of that. Websites is an Australian wedding website builder, guest management software, and wedding project planner all in one. Why is this such a game changer for you? Well, imagine everything to do with your wedding being in one place, updated in real time in the cloud, shareable to anyone else that's helping you, password protected for your guests, with notifications to tell you what needs to be done next and by when. It's amazing, right? I love how easy Websites is to set up and use, and how there are no ads on the platform yelling at you to spend more money on your wedding. To get started on your very own free wedding website, just head to wedsites.com. That's WEDSITES.com, and enter the code UNbridelyPod, that's Unbridely POD, to get 10% off their paid planning tools. The link is in the show notes. There's a lot to think about. And as you know, it doesn't have to be one or the other. You don't have to adopt your spouse's last name as it is, as it stands. You don't have to stick with your birth last name as it stands. There are alternative options. And if you're someone who's not sure about changing your last name, here are some of the different ways that you might be able to find a middle ground here. So the first one being hyphenation, the little dash between names. Smith-Jones, Jones-Smith. Combining both last names with a hyphen can honour both identities, both families, and signify you guys coming together. You could choose to use your birth last name professionally and in business, and to identify yourself to the external world, and use your spouse's last name in social settings, which is what I do. I'm Camille Abbott of the Unbridely podcast, Camille Abbott Marriage Celebrant, but out at school, out at dinner, I'm Mrs. Webber, I'm Mrs. Camille Webber. And that's how I sort of straddle those identities and make sure that I feel good about how I show up in the different areas of my life. You could create a brand new last name. So some couples choose to create a new last name that represents both partners equally. Some couples choose to link that with their current surnames. If one spouse had a last name of Marley and the other had a last name of Ellis, it might be Maris. You sort of get my meaning. And another option is to have dual last names. So some individuals use both their birth surname and married surnames without hyphenation, which allows flexibility in different contexts as well. So Sue Jones-Smith and Barry Smith-Jones. Ultimately, of course, the decision is a very, very personal one, and your decision should be made on what feels right for you and your unique circumstances. But there are a few questions you could ask yourself to help prompt you along the way, to help you come to a decision that you're happy with now and can also live with in the future. The first one, I would argue, is, do I like my name? Do I like it? Consider how attached you feel to your current last name. Reflect on what it means to you personally, professionally, culturally. And if you really like it, give yourself a little tick in the column for keeping it. Keeping it, or maybe altering or blending it. The next aspect would be to consider what's coming down the track. Think about the future. Have a think about how you envision your identity after you get married. Would changing your last name feel like a new chapter, or would it feel like losing a part of your identity? We want to go with the feeling that something new has started, has been born, has been created. Losing a part of you, a part of how you identify, is not going to be something you can live with in the long term. With your career, with your job, evaluate your professional implications of changing your last name. So consider how changing your last name might affect if you build a reputation or a brand, or you have published those scientific papers. Changing it could have implications around there. Or it could be just something that's technical, something you can live with, something where you can reroute those papers to your new last name, whether that's your spouse's, again, blended, hyphenated, double barreled. There are different ways that you can get around it. But consider it. Consider the impact on your career. And then networking, recognition. Have a think about how changing your last name might impact the network that you have in your field. And I would encourage you, once you've got all your ducks in a row in your own head, sometimes you've got to write them down so you can remember, then please have a discussion with your fiance because you need your partner's perspective. Have an open and honest discussion with your fiance about their views and their feelings about last names, about your last name, about theirs as well. Shared values and goals are very important at this stage. Discuss how both of you view tradition, family unity, personal identity. It can really help you to understand each other's priorities and values because they're both valid. And then once you've worked out what you think, what your fiance thinks, then it's time to go wider and have a think about the cultural norms. So the cultural expectations regarding name changes wherever you live, whatever culture you're a part of, whatever traditions are common in your family and in both of your backgrounds. And while the decision is ultimately yours, it's really smart to have an understanding about how your family's going to feel about you changing your last name or not. It can provide you with additional perspective and also get you ready to be able to answer the questions. Why did you choose to do that? Because it's going to come. It doesn't matter if you change your name, you do a blended one, you do a hyphenated one, you don't change your name. There will be people with opinions. And it's really smart to be armed with the power of knowing what is best for you, your fiance, your family. There are practical and legal aspects to consider as well. So make sure you're researching the legal process for changing your name in your country or region. Could be different. Have a think about the time, the effort, and the cost that's involved as well. Because it's one thing to go, yeah, this is what I want. And then you discover what it actually takes to change your name and everything else that goes along with it. Again, easynamechange.com. And thinking about those alternative options as well, it's important to not feel like you're restricted. I mean, there might be certain restrictions in the country or region that you're in, but in many, there are alternative options available to you. So the hyphenation idea, Smith-Jones, Jones-Smith, with that little dash, that little hyphen in between the two names, this can honour both identities, both families, and create a sense of unity and coming together to create your new family. You can do what I do. You can use your birth surname professionally because I was known by my birth last name well before I met my husband and we got married. For professional purposes, I use my birth surname, and in a social context, I use my husband's last name, and that's how I introduce myself when I'm meeting anyone associated with our family. We're a family unit. This is who we are, and that is who I am as well. And in some countries and regions, there's the option to create a brand new last name. So some couples choose to design, to dream up, to come up with something brand new that represents both partners equally and also the start of something new without being tied to their past. while others are using dual last names, so using both their maiden and married names without hyphenation, double-barreled sometimes it's called, which allows flexibility in different contexts. One of the most important questions I think that you want to pose to yourself is around your personal values and your feminist perspectives. And what I mean is reflecting on how your decision to change your name or not aligns with your views on gender equality, your independence. Some people believe that keeping your birth surname can be a statement of autonomy. And obviously, if this is something important to you, it's not a value that you drop at the door when you get married. The meaning of what each option symbolises to you personally and your fiancé and how it aligns with your different values and beliefs is super important. How it sits in your gut is super important. Listen to your gut on this one. With making your decision, I highly recommend simply a line down the centre of the page and writing down or typing in your pros and cons. Make a list of the reasons why you want to change your last name. Put a list of the reasons why you don't. Seeing them on paper, seeing them physically, seeing them in a notes app on your phone, it can help you clarify your thoughts. And it also helps you to question, okay, they were my thoughts. I wrote them down. Are they truly what I think? Are they truly what I believe? I'd encourage you to take your time. Don't rush into the decision. Take the time you need to feel confident in your choice because it's really hard to go back and make another change after that. You want to be able to go, yes, I made this decision. It's the best decision for us. And this is who we're going to be moving forward. And trust your instincts because choosing to change your name or not, to blend or not, to come up with a brand new name, it involves balancing your personal identity, your professional career considerations. It can also be a balance of your cultural expectations, your fiancés and your extended families, and just the practicalities of modern life. And so reflecting on these factors and discussing them with your partner as openly as you possibly can with the intent of understanding where your fiancé is coming from, you can make a choice that truly aligns with your values and future goals and that you're proud of and that you're happy to have announced on your wedding day. And please, I would love to find out how you went about choosing to change your name or not and what it means to you. Tell me, give me the feedback because my perspective and those of the couples that I've married is only a very slender slice of the big picture. You can DM me anytime at Unbridely on Instagram, or you can email me, hello@unbridely.com. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know how you went about it. Because if you've got something different, something new as well, I would love to share it with everyone else. Because that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make every little step of this adventure as simple as possible for you. And I'll catch you next week. That about wraps it up for this episode of the Unbridely podcast. For the links and resources we mentioned, please head to the show notes. And if you love the show, please review and subscribe on the podcast platform you're on now so you don't miss out on a single episode. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, weddings are a team sport. Catch you soon.